The voicemail lasted 11 seconds. That was all it took to change everything. "Hey Danny, so look, we ran the numbers on the Airbnb and honestly, with Mom's wheelchair and the pack-and-play for the twins, there's just no room. You understand, right? Love you." Daniel Reeves stood in the break room of a Cincinnati insurance office on a gray Tuesday in February, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, listening to his older brother Marcus reduce 3 months of excited planning to 11 seconds of cheerful regret. He played it twice. Then he set the mug down very carefully on the counter, as though setting it down hard might shatter something he wasn't ready to lose yet, and he stared out the window at a parking lot turning wet with February sleet. He had been the one to suggest the family trip. That was the part that stung like a wasp hiding in a good memory. Back in November at Thanksgiving, when the whole Reeves clan was squeezed around his mother's dining table in Columbus, Marcus and his wife Priya, the twins in their matching bibs, Aunt Lorraine with her perpetual commentary, his mother Beverly in the good chair by the window. It had been Daniel who'd raised a glass of boxed wine and said, "What if this summer we all actually went somewhere together like we used to?" Everyone had cheered. His mother had cried a little. Marcus had immediately started a group chat called REVES Vacation Palm Tree and pinged it 40 times before New Year's. Daniel had spent January researching Outer Banks rentals, building a shared Google Doc with beach access ratings and pet policies and parking notes, even though nobody in the family had a pet. He had been thorough in the way only a person with too much hope and too much time invests in something. And then, on a Tuesday in February, 11 seconds of voicemail. He had been thorough in the way only a person with too much hope and too much time invests in something. And then, on a Tuesday in February, 11 seconds of voicemail. Here's what Daniel Reeves did not do. He did not call Marcus back and say it was fine. He did not spend the evening doom-scrolling on his couch with takeout Thai food and the particular grief of a man who has been gently, lovingly excluded. He did not shrink. Instead, somewhere between his second listen to the voicemail and the moment he poured the lukewarm coffee down the sink, something shifted in his chest, a tectonic, quiet rearrangement, and he thought, well then, I'm going anyway. Part 1. The booking. He texted Marcus back that evening. "No worries at all, totally understand, have an amazing time." He meant it too, that was the strangest part. Daniel was 31 years old, unmarried, without a dog or a dependent or anything that required watering, and he had just been handed the rarest gift modern adulthood offers, a week of guilt-free solitude disguised as an unfortunate exclusion. He opened his laptop. The family had booked the Outer Banks for the 3rd week of July. So Daniel opened Google Flights and typed 3 letters he'd never seriously used before, anywhere. The algorithm served him Lisbon for $487 round trip. He stared at it for a long time. He had never been to Europe. He had been to Cancun once for a college friend's wedding and had spent most of it sunburned at the swim-up bar, talking to a retired teacher from Akron named Gary. He had been to Chicago many times, which Daniel firmly believed did not count as travel so much as visiting a larger, windier version of everywhere he already knew. But Lisbon was yellow trams and fado music and hills above the Tagus River and tiles the color of the ocean. He had read about it once in a magazine at his dentist's office and thought, idly, the way you think about things that seem designed for other people. Someday, maybe. He booked it in 14 minutes before the reasonable part of his brain could convene a committee. The next 3 months were an education in what it feels like to want something just for yourself. Daniel had spent most of his adult life being the easy one, the brother who didn't need much, the son who sorted out the logistics, the friend who showed up with beer and asked how everyone else was doing. Planning a solo trip, he discovered, required a different posture entirely. There was no consensus to build, no dietary restrictions to accommodate, no schedule to negotiate. He could book a tiny guest house in Alfama, the oldest, hilliest neighborhood in Lisbon, because he personally was delighted by the idea of cobblestone streets and medieval walls, and nobody could outvote him. He could plan a day trip to Sintra to walk through fairy tale palaces in the morning fog, then spend the rest of the afternoon in a cafe with a custard tart and a novel, and not feel guilty about the pace. He could build an itinerary that was entirely, almost aggressively, his. Part 2. July. The flight left Cincinnati at 6:40 on a Saturday morning in the 3rd week of July. Daniel arrived at the airport at 4, which was excessive, but he was a man who had never traveled alone internationally and he was not going to start by missing his flight. He sat at his gate with a breakfast sandwich and his passport, which he had checked was in his bag 17 times since Thursday, and watched the terminal fill up with families. He saw a father wrestling a stroller through a security checkpoint. He saw a mother negotiating with a 4-year-old about whether the iPad counted as screen time if it was educational. He felt for a moment the small ghost of longing, the old familiar ache of the man on the outside of a warm room. Then the gate agent called for boarding, and Daniel Reeves stood up and walked onto the plane alone and did not look back. He had a window seat. He watched Ohio disappear beneath clouds. Somewhere over the Atlantic, somewhere around the 3rd hour of the flight when the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers folded themselves into uncomfortable sleep, Daniel did something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He felt cleanly and without embarrassment excited. Not anxious excited, not the kind of low-grade performance anxiety that accompanied most of the significant moments of his adult life. Just excited. The uncomplicated animal thrill of not knowing what was coming next. Lisbon in July is warm in a way that is Mediterranean and therefore categorically different from the humid, buzzing heat of a Cincinnati summer. It is warm like a held breath, dry and golden, the kind of warmth that makes late afternoon light look like it was arranged by a painter. Daniel landed at 9 in the morning local time, took the metro to the city center, and walked his rolling suitcase uphill through Alfama, sweating, slightly lost, navigating on his phone past laundry lines stretched between buildings and cats sleeping on warm stone walls, until he found his guest house. A converted 18th century townhouse run by a woman named Conceição who handed him a key and a small map and said, in precise English, "Dinner is better after 9 here. The tourists eat at 7, you don't want to be a tourist." He asked her how to tell the difference. She smiled and said, "The tourists ask that question too, go walk, you'll figure it out. Dinner is better after 9 here, the tourists eat at 7, you don't want to be a tourist." He went and walked. He walked for 5 hours on the first day, which was probably too many, but he was sustained by espresso and the discovery that a city built on 7 hills offers a new view from every corner. He found a mirador, a lookout terrace, where old men played cards in the shadow of a ruined Moorish castle, and he sat on a bench at the edge of it and looked out over the red-roofed city and the wide, silver estuary of the Tagus reaching toward the Atlantic, and he sat there for a very long time without taking a single photograph, not because he didn't want to remember it, because he wanted to be in it. Part 3. The people he met because he was alone. Here is something Daniel had not anticipated. Being alone in a foreign city makes you profoundly, surprisingly available to other people. At home, he moved through his days along established grooves, the commute, the office, the gym, the same 3 restaurants, and rarely spoke to anyone he didn't already know. In Lisbon, without the buffer of familiarity, without a companion to default to, he found himself talking to everyone. On the second day, at a cervejaria near the waterfront, he ended up at a shared table with a retired schoolteacher from Porto named Henrique, who had opinions about architecture, Portuguese wine, the current state of European football, and the underappreciated genius of Billy Wilder films. They talked for 3 hours. Henrique paid for the wine and told Daniel as they parted on the cobblestones outside, "You Americans are funnier than you think you are. Mostly because you're always surprised when something is beautiful." On the third day, on the train to Sintra, he sat next to a young woman from Seoul named Jeon who was spending 6 months traveling alone after leaving a corporate job that had been slowly converting her, she said, into a spreadsheet. She and Daniel spent the day in Sintra together by accident. Their pace matched, their interests matched, the comfortable silence between conversations matched, and they ate lunch at a hilltop restaurant with a view of the Atlantic, and talked about the specific exhaustion of being the reliable one, the one who holds things together for everyone else, and how strange it felt to do something only for yourself. "I felt guilty for the first month," she said. "Now I think I was guilty because I'd never been taught that I was also a person who deserved things." Daniel turned this sentence over for the rest of the trip like a coin found on the street, checking its edges, testing its weight. On the 4th day, he went alone to the Museu Nacional do Azulejo, the tile museum, and spent 2 hours looking at blue and white panels depicting 18th century Lisbon before an earthquake remade the city. He thought about his family. He thought about his mother, who had never left the continental United States, who had worked for 30 years as a school nurse and told Daniel every Christmas without variation that she was proud of him. He took out his phone and called her. Not because he was lonely, because he wanted to tell her about the tiles, about the way the museum had a panel showing the entire Lisbon skyline as it existed before 1755, every building standing in perfect detail, the city that no longer existed captured in blue paint on ceramic. His mother listened carefully and said, "That sounds like something I'd like to see." Daniel said, "Then let's go, just us, next spring." There was a silence that felt like something opening. "Okay," his mother said. "Okay, Danny, let's do that." Part 4. The night he understood. On the 5th evening, 2 nights before his flight home, Daniel ate dinner alone at a small restaurant in Moraria, the neighborhood just below the castle, at 9:15, which meant he was eating at the right time like a local, which he was almost but not quite. He ordered grilled sea bass and a half carafe of vinho verde and a bread basket he finished entirely without guilt. The restaurant was candlelit and small, and the walls were hung with old photographs of Lisbon. A woman sang fado from a stool in the corner, live, not recorded, not a tourist performance, just a woman singing because it was evening and the restaurant was the right size for the sound of her voice. Fado is not happy music. It is music built around a Portuguese concept called saudade, which translates imprecisely as a longing for something you may have never had or may never see again, a beautiful ache, a love for the missing. Daniel didn't know any of this when the woman started singing. He only knew that she was singing something slow and true, and that the room had gone quietly attentive the way rooms do when something real is happening in them, and that he was a man sitting alone at a small table with good wine and sea bass and a week he had built entirely for himself, in a city that had collapsed and rebuilt itself and kept on existing. And that something in the music and the night and the candle and his own startled heart made his eyes fill up in a way he was glad nobody he knew could see. He had spent 31 years making space for everyone else, making space at the table in the car in the airbnb that didn't have room for him. He had made himself small and easy and accommodating and called it love. And it was love genuinely, he didn't doubt that. But somewhere in the subtraction he had lost the habit of taking up space himself, of wanting things loudly, of planning something for the single reason that it would make Daniel Reeves happy. And here he was. He had spent 31 years making space for everyone else. Somewhere in the subtraction he had lost the habit of taking up space himself. He left a generous tip and walked home through Alfama in the dark, uphill on the cobblestones, past the cats still stationed on their walls and the sound of television sets through open shuttered windows, and he stood for a few minutes at his favorite Miradoro looking at the city lit up below him and the black water of the Tagus reflecting city light, and he felt the specific, irreplaceable satisfaction of a person who has done the exact right thing. Coming home. Marcus met him at the Columbus airport 2 days later. Daniel had stopped in Columbus on the way back to pick up some things from his mother's attic. Marcus looked tan from the Outer Banks, happy, slightly exhausted in the way that fathers of toddler twins always look. He hugged Daniel at baggage claim and said, "How was it?" "We felt terrible, by the way." "Don't," Daniel said, "genuinely best week of my life." Marcus looked at him with the particular skepticism of an older brother who has known you your entire life and knows all your versions. "You're different," he said finally. "I bought a return ticket," Daniel said. "For spring I'm taking Mom." Marcus blinked. "You're taking Mom to Portugal." "Someone should." There was a pause and then Marcus laughed, really laughed, the full barrel-chested laugh that Daniel had been listening to his whole life, and he grabbed Daniel's bag and swung it over his shoulder and said, "Okay, yeah, someone should." They walked out into the August heat of an Ohio evening, the parking lot blurring at its edges in the last of the day's light, and Daniel felt it again, that tectonic, quiet rearrangement in his chest, not grief this time but something more durable, some bedrock certainty, that he was a person who deserved to go somewhere, who deserved to arrive. 11 seconds of voicemail had given him that. He would never say so to Marcus, but he thought it sometimes, standing at a window planning the next trip. There was already a next trip forming in his mind, Istanbul maybe, or Oaxaca, or the Norwegian fjords in autumn, and he thought, "Thank you for not having room. Thank you for leaving the space that turned out to be mine."